Hello, students. Welcome again to another lecture with me, Professor William Wright. Today, I'm actually just continuing with part 2 of chapter 19 of Living with Art by Mark Getlein. So let me just jump in where we were on the end of part 1. We were looking at this slide about the Silk Road and the transformation and material goods expanding across the entire Eurasian continent. Now, of course, like I said, we have material goods in Europe, based in China. We have goods from India and Arabia in Europe. And that all goes through the Roman world. It's really at this time it would be a connection between almost like the Asian world, the African, the Arabian, and Roman worlds. But in any case, we see the good of silk, pottery, goods of silk and pottery and things spread. We also get science, tech, and diseases. But I'm mainly now going to use this as a way to talk about the religions or philosophies that sort of have spread across the Silk Road. So by the end of Han rule, the Silk Road is well established, and um, we have had information from India and the Central Asia area kind of like moving into China. But as the Han dynasty ends, several weaker dynasties kind of take place. China essentially collapses for a little bit. It no longer is united after the Han, but by the time it comes back into power, reunites in 581 AD. Indian missionaries had spread Buddhism across the Silk Road, and actually the Tang dynasty, which sort of quickly is established once China is reunited, it creates or establishes Buddhism as the official religion of China. So yeah, Buddhism takes center stage under Tang dynasty in China. The Bodhisattva Guide of Souls here we see is some of the earliest kind of Buddhist art, Bodhisattva art that we see in established reunited China under the Tang dynasty here. Now, lots of different bodhisattva and its own sort, China has its own take on Buddhism, and we see lots of different images and styles of images done after the Buddha, after Bodhisattva. But as it expands this imagery, a new dynasty takes place, or forms up a couple hundred years after the Tang established Buddhism in China, and this is the Song dynasty, begins by 960 A.D. And one of their big bodhisattva, one of the big images, one of the people that they use a lot in their Buddhist art is Guanyin, who is like a bodhisattva spirit who resides on the mountain and offers guidance and wisdom to those who travel by sea. He's really, like, the whole point is this focus on nature. But now we see here this image of Guanyin. It's very it has a very Chinese oriented like figural kind of depiction, right? It's not symmetrical. It's very naturalistic. It's kind of got a more sophisticated pose. So this is like post-Greek, post-Roman uh, uh, art, and this is later kind of getting into the Middle Ages. And in any case, this is made from wood. It's highly decorated. It has definitely like a Southeastern Asian feel, but what it really gives way to is more and more focus on nature imagery in Buddhist art, right? So combining the growth and popularity of art done by brushwork and long present nature imagery, the Song dynasty, with this focus on nature, develops this style of monumental landscape that's all about these big views of typically like a river or an ocean leading up to like mountains receding into the background. So the Summer Mountains here, done by Qi Jing, circa 1050, is really a good display of the culmination of these landscapes done by Song artists. Now we see it's mostly ink, it's like ink wash, right, done with brush, but it also includes some Chinese calligraphy. Here in the top right, we know by now there's a long established writing system in China. And basically there's this focus on it's almost like murals or panels that are going to go on a wall to like completely cover that wall, or dividers, movable walls, and things become a common place to put these sort of nature focused landscapes, and it just becomes a common motif we see throughout the art of China in the Middle Ages, or what would be the Middle Ages. Now, yeah, we see the introduction later of more color and more elaborate like detailing, again trying to show yeah, more layers, different kinds of ink, different kinds of value in the colored material. But yeah, throughout most of these early days, these landscapes are ink wash again, and a lot of times perspective is sort of exaggerated or changed, and the figures, even if the point of what's happening is the figures, they're still usually depicted as very small. A lot of times the temples are sort of small in contrast to the big nature, right? Now, as we move again towards the late, again, what would be the late Middle Ages, uh, we get three dynasties: the Yuan, the Ming, and the Qing. This is, from the end of Song, these three dynasties get us all the way to the end of the traditional Chinese dynasty, which happens in 1911. But under these three dynasties, we see the development of this culture in China, where all members of higher classes, from the government to the military, or anybody who had any sort of status in society, they were expected to be scholarly, and they were often expected to be artistic or creative in nature, right? So they study philosophy, they study literature, they study painting, and of course they study calligraphy. So being poetic, being a painter, and also being a scholar of Asian history is sort of central to being a status in China throughout this time. Now, the first, I'm going to move to the images here. We see landscapes here, continuing that sort of common thread of the landscape. It continues through the Yuan dynasty, which actually is Mongol powers, the people who have come out of Genghis Khan and his progeny. They begin to actually take over parts of China, and the Yuan dynasty is actually Mongol leadership, and they have these specific masters. But you actually see here how, again, the Mongols have sort of absorbed Chinese culture, and they take part in it rather than just like wiping it out. They just incorporate it and expand it, with Mongol culture. But in any case, yeah, we see again the landscapes, especially vertical landscapes, allow this sort of really exaggerated perspective, and we also see the calligraphy expanding, right? We see more poetry, we see more scholarly reflection. I don't know, the artist signatures are usually these stamps that we're seeing all throughout. And in any case, yeah, we just see the continuation of this throughout the Yuan. But yeah, the Ming and the Qing do the same. And I guess I forgot to mention this last bullet point here. The word for these scholarly officials is the lottery, well, not the lottery, the literati, or the Shishen, or the Jinshen, or Zhangchen. I'm sure I'm saying those very wrong. But in any case, yeah, it becomes a cultural class of its own, the scholar official or the scholar artist. Now, again, as we get to the later Middle Ages, by the 1400s, 1500s, we see color being introduced. We see more animal imagery. We see more focus on detail, right? Up close flowers. And we see this on the fans that are kind of any sort of panel type of or paper type of imagery. It's typically going to have some form of like nature, animal, or landscape imagery. Again, colors developing. This piece done during the Qing dynasty towards the end, and then yeah, by the 1911, that's when we start to see communism take over in China. I think 1911 may have been when Japan. Close to when Japan attacks, and China just goes through some big upheavals and has a lot of trouble for the next couple decades, and now it becomes modern communist China, which we'll talk later. We're saving the 20th century for another chapter, but in reality, we don't talk a ton about Chinese art because there's a time where communism isn't typically conducive to new creatives. It sort of venerates the past. But in any case, yeah, so that gets us to where we're going to end talking about China. So let's move to talking about Japan, the island nation off the coast of China. One of the other like big cultures. Again, I'm sorry that we're not covering more about Korea, Vietnam, Thailand. We're going to cover some more of the Pacific later, but let's kind of wrap up this chapter by talking about Japan, the Asuka and Heian periods, where we're going to start. We're going to talk about samurai culture and some other things. But for starters, actually, we're going to talk about how Japan is an island nation. So it actually was separated from China by the Sea of Japan. We know that it was inhabited by Neolithic people by 10,000 BC, so that's very early cultures on this island. Now, it quickly establishes a heavy ceramic or pottery based art, and again, animal imagery here with a different name. Haniwa is the word we have for, and these are actually figurines that they're finished. They're not just attached to pots, but they're actual animal figurines that were maybe used as toys, used as some sort of figure or a spirit. But in any case, the Haniwa are their own terracotta, artworks. Yeah, so this is early Japanese art. And early, again, I'm not going to dig into this as much because I don't know as much about it, if I'm being honest. But Shinto is a nature-based system of deities that stretches back to the ancient Japan. It's based on landscape imagery, and this led its shrines to becoming a common architectural features. Much like most of the religions we talked about, the shrines built around Shinto become synonymous with Japanese architecture. We see the sort of early, especially in the early days, the whole point is for them to blend into the landscape. They have the bracket systems, the very large roofs, but they're clearly like wood, very light material houses or buildings. Lots of ventilation, lots of open space. But in any case, yeah, we see this becomes, and it becomes kind of helps later, or lends itself to the later development of like pagodas and culture that make their way into Japan from China, more like stacked structures. But you can actually see that these early temples, while they have that Chinese influence, they still retain a lot of Japanese culture in the temple, right? And like I said, that those large roofs supported by bracket systems, which we talked about in the architecture section. But the first established dynasty that we're going to talk about is actually in the AD times. Of course, there's lots of culture and influence happening in Japan prior to this, but by the 16th century, Chinese influence, it's become really common in Japan. It has made its way across the Sea of Japan. Even later, I guess it's quite a bit later than the Asuka, you have the Mongols trying to invade Japan. And of course, it doesn't work. That's where you get the name kamikaze wave and things like that for later. But in any case, the Asuka period sees great change and big Western influence, adjusting it. It's like I've already said, it changes the architecture, it changes the religion, and Buddhism sort of absorbs and overtakes Shinto in ways. They live alongside each other, but Buddhism also becomes a major religion in Japan. But we see the Shinto temples here now as sometime after the end of the Asuka period. We also move the capital, or the capital becomes Kyoto. So basically, they're just establishing a capital of Japan at this point. And in the Heian period, when Kyoto is the capital, refinement begins to captivate Chinese society, much like Confucianism and Taoism had earlier affected Chinese society. Some of the scholar painter things that are beginning to develop in China are also happening basically in Japan, but with a Japanese twist, right? They have Shinto in addition to the other historical ideas they have in Japan, in addition to Western influence. But in any case, accomplishment in the arts, especially poetry and calligraphy, become expected of both men and women. And again, this is maybe even more sprawling than just the aristocratic classes that we see in China. This becomes, if you're going to write in Japan, you're going to write Japanese calligraphy. And actually, Japanese calligraphy I have this image here. It's a much different look to me than the Chinese calligraphy. I'm actually going to zoom back real fast. So you see Chinese calligraphy here is very ordered, very, each figure you know when it ends and it's becoming the next figure, versus Japanese calligraphy is much more fluid. I always like to think of them as like Chinese is like print and Japanese is like cursive, right? There's a flowiness. I don't know. It seems difficult to me to recognize any repeating characters here in this particular writing. But yeah, I know that Japanese calligraphy is very sort of spontaneous in ways, and it's a difficult. Actually, I've always understood it's sometimes difficult to be literate in Japanese society because it's so difficult to write their calligraphy. But in any case, maybe that's an exaggeration, but and just sort of I'm biased because I love the look of Japanese calligraphy. But in any case, this refinement once again sort of takes over in Japan, much like it did in China. Now, a cultural phenomenon that is sort of specific to Japan over China is the samurai warrior class. So these are regional warriors that are sort of aristocratic soldiers, right? They're established, successful, like wealthy soldiers after a time in any case, but years of infighting and feudalism lead to a military state established, and for much of Japan's history they have more of a shogun, which is like a military leader or a general leading the country rather than just a royal, or it's not somebody anointed by God as much as anointed by victory, right? That's anointment by God is a common way of deciding what the monarch's going to be. But in any case, yeah, this samurai class develops in Japan, and it has a large effect on the art there. Of course, grotesque features reflect military fierceness, and realism actually does begin to flourish during the Kamakura sculptural period. The Kamakura period in general just sees a lot of advancement in technique, anatomical study, mixed media, right? So we have this head of the guardian done in lacquer, crystal, metal, cloth, hinoki. This wood carved piece here shows a lot of anatomical structure. We see the pose not dissimilar from Buddhist poses, but it definitely has its own unique Japanese flair in the sort of intensity of the facial expressions of the characters, right? So realism flourishes in sculpture, and again, it just sort of the art just has a lot of focus on military prowess. Now, Shinto does continue. The Kamakura still treasure Shinto, especially the specific deity Hachiman, but Buddhism does continue to grow through the period of the Kamakura. Now, here actually we see Hachiman, who is a Shinto deity, actually as a Buddhist monk, right? So it's one of those really fun, like cross-cultural images that we get to see here in this picture of Hachiman. But in any case, another shift in power leads to the Murimachi district being kind of the focus of power, the capital. So during the Muromachi period, they continue to grow Buddhism, but still with this sort of military bent. So the ethos of Zen Buddhism is born, but it especially takes hold among the samurai. And that's when we get some really cool, like Zen ideas that begin to happen that really, again, separate Chinese artistry from Japanese. But let's talk about what Zen is. Well, Zen is just Buddhism essentially for the samurai in any case. But one of the common things, one of the common developments or tools of Zen is the koan. So they're irrational questions that are meant to short circuit thought. This is all about meditation. Zen is all about meditation. And you ask yourself these questions that are unanswerable, like what is the sound of a hand clapping? Well, you can't just explain it by doing it. How do you explain it in words? Well, you can't, right? So that is an example of I guess it's kind of like the original, like if a tree falls and no one's there to hear it, did it make a sound, right? All those sort of questions that are in ways unanswerable, or what you meditate on in Zen. But then in this sort of, and you do this while you're raking your Zen garden, and sort of reflecting, there's some activity and action as part of Zen meditation, but there's also one of the activities and actions that takes place, and this is what I really want to focus on and make sure you guys get, is the splashed ink painting that happens as you're meditating. So out of the chaos that comes from the short circuiting or the turning off or shutting down of your brain, either through a koan or meditation of some other kind, you reach this moment. I'm going to call it enlightenment, although, yeah, I guess that's what Buddhism is all about, is reaching enlightenment. But there's this sudden appearance of meaning that's beyond words. It's all of the sound of chaos sort of like flattening out. And when you use this in painting, basically haboku is the name for it, and you take ink and quickly do your painting with as few strokes as you can, with as little information as possible, and you just basically splash the ink across the page. Now, that's not to say that it's non-objective. You can see here in this image, there's this mark in the background. If I were to ask you in class what this is, almost every year somebody says a mountain. Well, yeah, that's what it is. But does it look like a mountain? No, not really. It's about as little information as you could be given, and also know that this is a mountain. We mostly know it because there's the tree in front. But once again, this is a pretty small amount of information. So it's, again, about as little information as you could give and still see a tree by a lake, maybe in front of a mountain, right? So this is a new form of landscape. This is the Hoboku Zen landscape. And you ought to be able to see the difference between this and what we saw in the elaborate, very detailed Chinese landscapes. But in any case, yeah, this is a really beautiful technique that I like the spontaneity of. And this kind of leads us to another era. Again, there's always going to be the samurai class in Japan, but the emperor starts to begin to take power, and the Momoyama period represents a flourishing of Japanese culture, right? So there's three rulers throughout the Momoyama period, and we see one of the emperors here, Emperor Wen, meeting fishermen. The fisherman Lu Jiang. This is a screen painting, again, not dissimilar from some of the screens that we've seen in Chinese landscapes and things. These very kind of minimal or stylized pseudo landscapes, that are about the people, but also about the setting, and just as much as that, and they perform a function as well, being a divider of sorts. But the Momoyama period, of course, what I really want to focus on in Momoyama is going to be the pottery. So Shino and Oribe pottery begins to really form up. This is as a potter who's really been informed by Japanese and wood-fired history. These are things that I really like to talk about. So the tea ceremony actually becomes a central part of the ritual of Zen, especially using wares associated with special tea masters. And in our case, I'm going to talk about Furata Oribe, because his specific forms of tea ware are still something we see designed today. I have several books in there about it. A lot of times his stuff it's about the tea bowl, as well as the baskets that you would put your tea in, or your snacks or whatever, right? It is all the different parts of the tea ritual, and it's sort of like Furata Oribe, or Oribe, is the designer of the experience, right? It's this whole Zen like meditation around making your tea. And so what they start to realize is the artist behind the ceramics, is just as important as the maker of the tea, and the ritual of creating the cup of tea. So Furata makes, he's a tea master. He gets these designs for different kinds of ceramics, and we see this is the Oribe. This is real traditional Oribe style. This specific green, we actually still call that green Oribe green, but with brushwork sort of between these areas of green, but there's also a black oribe decoration that again is sort of coincides with marks that are put on the pot. And then another thing, besides being these sort of shapes that are often not just simple round shapes, we also see even when things are thrown on the wheel and made to be round, they're often not in any way meant to be symmetrical or controlled, right? They a lot of times push it until they're losing control. And so we have this sort of undulating, like full of movement piece of pottery in either case, right? And my favorite thing that I like to point out about a lot of Momoyama pottery and what pulls me to it, we compare it to Chinese pottery, which is very tight and very clean. There's lots of good, of obvious reasons to love Chinese pottery, but what I love is all the nuances of that movement. And then also, to me, it always looks like Japanese pottery from this time is like floating off of the table, right? It has a foot underneath it of some sort in most cases. You can kind of see this one here, but for the most part, it just sort of is like lifted, right? And if you were to spin this tea bowl on a lazy Susan or something, it would just be so full of movement. But in any case, yeah, that's something I like to focus on as we move through the art history of Japan is of course the pottery. We also have Shino developing, which Shino is just a word for white, but it's this really specific type of glaze that's basically just what they call feldspar. It's like basically just a glass former and a little bit of clay, and it just is a simple white wash, but it does all sorts of cool things like these little pinholes, or it gets little crackles in it. Not unlike if you guys have like seen Seth Rogen's work now, and that sort of genre of peely, crawly glazes. That's what they call it. But yeah, it's like early acceptance of like flaws as beauty, and we see, yeah, here this one has iron brushwork underneath it, so a lot of times the iron brushwork is sort of faded and you don't really see a lot of it. But in any case, yeah, and it's often real like crunchy stoneware. I like the word crunchy or sandy. It's not smooth porcelain like you see come out of China. But as the Momoyama period winds down, we have the era of Edo, which is basically the capital, which is now Tokyo. So the capital is moved to Edo, and Edo is Tokyo. So it's essentially modern Japan starts to develop, and art expansion begins. This happens, yeah, from the 1600s, or yeah, to the 1800s. And this is basically the idea that art isn't just going to be for the royals and for the emperors. It's going to be spread for more people, and be more like an entertainment culture in Japan as a broader culture. But in any case, theaters, bathhouses, tea houses, brothels, all forms of public spaces become a place to display art. And again, as entertainment or as art. Art is now published in books. We have block books reach China, and that's what most people don't realize. These are prints. These are block books. The Great Wave, Hozukai made these 36 views of Mount Fuji, and the Great Wave is not a standalone piece. It's part of a book of views of Mount Fuji, and it was all about how when turned into a book and printed, that the broader Japanese public could have access to these images, right? So it creates a really specific stylized culture that follows Japan specifically, and again, it's separating itself from just mainland China's look. Now, there is Shino pottery does continue this sort of white covered pottery with iron brushed underneath to give sort of delicate repeating motifs, and a lot of times it's like flower patterns or just simple plain brushwork, right? So Mino and Seto are two different cities where pottery is made. We see it's a little tighter. It's still not the soft white super tightness of Chinese pottery, but it's a little more refined in character. But yeah, Shino actually continues today. It's a very popular glaze among ceramicists. Now it looks way different. Americans took Shino and made it its own thing that's got all this orange and red and like different changes due to adding other materials. But in any case, the pottery culture still develops in Japan alongside that modernizing that idea of like art for everyone. And then kind of in closing, I want to talk about now again, we're up to the 1900s at this point, and of course we know the 19th and 20th century is industrial revolution, and everything starts to change all over the world, and Japan is no exception. So this is where I'm going to end my focus specifically on Japan, and then we'll come back to it later when we're talking about the 20th century. But in any case, wabi sabi is how I like to close this, which is something that a lot of people have heard of and know and sort of associate with Japan. It's this art of imperfection and impermanence. It is, asymmetrical, rough, more organic, right? Natural or more organic forms are accepted, and as well as something that is broken and then repaired or put back together. It's all just part of the process of enjoying art, right? And it's this metaphor for life as well of like, not everyone's perfect, not every, no one's going to be here forever. And so it's about the experience and the journey of an artwork, the experience of you as the viewer or partaker in using art, or how the art, what happens to the art as it moves through time. But in any case, it's sort of just, I don't know. It's all the loosey goosey stuff that you see across Japanese culture. It's not just related to ceramics. It's related to all areas. Again, that calligraphy was just sort of different. It was looser. It was more natural. It was more organic than the refined tightness of Chinese calligraphy and stuff. But when we talk about ceramics, there is a specific method I like to talk about. Again, most people have probably seen it. Kintsugi is a type of wabi sabi, not wabiya, just wabi sabi, and is applied to broken ceramic vessels where cracks or breaks are filled with gold or silver lacquer rather than hidden. So rather than just gluing it back together and trying to make it look like nothing ever happened, in Japan, in the kintsugi process, they actually highlight it. They put precious materials into the glue so that you will always see those cracks. You'll always see those breaks, right? And it's this again a metaphor of being broken, being reborn, being imperfect, loving the journey instead of just the simple refinement. I don't know. It's a metaphor for a lot of things. They'll even sometimes, if they've lost chunks of ancient pottery, they can like take multiple pieces of pottery and build them into a new finished work. And right, it's just this whole process around putting ceramics back together with that in a way that highlights the journey of the piece. But in any case, that's called kintsugi. It represents wabi sabi, which is it's a part of wabi sabi, which is a broader Japanese art culture. But in any case, that's how I like to end talking about Japan. I hope you enjoyed that part two of uh, chapter 19. And I will post it soon. And yeah, talk to y'all later. Thank you.